"Shut your mouth before I blow your head off," Thorne roared, ripping open the Jeep door. Inside, little Brianna cried out in terror. Xavier Rollins slowly stepped out, his broad shoulders shaking with anger, but his voice was cold as ice. "Leave my daughter alone." Thorne laughed, with mean scorn. "People like you only know how to have kids, not raise them. Tonight, you go to jail." The handcuffs clicked and bit deep into Xavier's wrists at 5:19 p.m. Thorne felt smug and untouchable in this quiet, lonely county. He had no idea this single dad would soon send him to the hot seat of a federal court. Just 17 minutes before that scream, before that door flew open, the evening had felt almost peaceful. Xavier Rollins was 38 years old. He had a square jaw and deep, calm eyes. His shoulders were broad, and his hands were steady. Back in Mobile, Alabama, those hands signed federal court orders. Out here, they gripped a steering wheel on a wet mountain road. His wife had died in November, 2 years before this drive. Cancer took her fast, faster than anyone expected. Since then, Xavier's whole world had shrunk down to two things. One was his job on the bench. The other was his daughter, Brianna, 7 years old, and full of questions. He still kept her toothbrush in the same cup by the sink. He never moved it. Some mornings he would stand in the kitchen doorway and just breathe, letting the quiet settle around him like fog. Brianna filled that quiet now. Her laugh bounced off the hallway walls and made the empty house feel less empty. Every morning, Xavier woke up at 6:15 sharp. He made pancakes and poured on real honey, the kind that cost $4 more than the store brand. He skipped every fancy party the courthouse crowd threw. Weekends belonged to Brianna and nothing else. That Friday, he loaded her into his black 2021 Jeep Grand Cherokee. He had paid $43,500 for it, every cent earned. They were driving to see her late grandmother's old house in rural Mississippi. Brianna hummed along to a cartoon song. Rain tapped soft on the windshield. At 5:02 p.m., the Jeep rolled past a rusty sign. "Welcome to Pine Crest County," it said, the paint peeling at the edges. The sky turned dark fast. Thin mist crawled low across Route 45, wrapping around the pine trees like smoke. The smell of wet pine needles drifted through the cracked window. Somewhere out in the trees, an owl called twice and went quiet. The wipers thumped a slow, steady beat against the glass. Xavier eased his foot off the gas as the fog thickened around the next curve. Then red and blue lights lit up the mirror. A patrol car, number 308, came up fast behind them. Xavier's pulse ticked up in his throat. He signaled, calm and correct, and pulled onto the wet gravel shoulder. His hand stayed steady on the wheel, though his jaw had gone tight. He had done nothing wrong. He knew the law better than most judges alive. The deputy stepped out. His name was Silas Thorne, 43 years old, with a soft belly pressed against his gun belt. His eyes were small and mean. He did not walk toward the car like a normal officer. He walked like a man hunting something. His hand rested on his Glock the whole way. Rain dripped off the brim of his hat and ran down his neck. Gravel crunched loud under his boots, slow and deliberate, like he wanted Xavier to hear every step. The patrol car's headlights threw long shadows across the wet asphalt. Inside his jacket, Xavier carried a gold-trimmed ID card. It named him a United States District Judge. One flash of that card, and Thorne would freeze up and apologize fast. Xavier looked at Brianna in the mirror. Her small hands gripped her seatbelt strap, knuckles pale. Then he looked at Thorne, closing in with heavy boots and an ugly sneer. His own pulse thudded once hard behind his ribs. A question burned inside him. If he flashed his badge now, he would walk free in 30 seconds. But how many other fathers, men without a gold card in their pocket, had this deputy crushed on this same road? He thought of every case that ever crossed his own desk back in Alabama. Men who never got a fair shot. Men who never had proof, only their word against a badge. Out here tonight, he could finally stand exactly where they had stood. Xavier made his choice. He left the card in his jacket. Tonight, he would stand as an ordinary man, nothing more. He would let the cameras catch every single word this deputy said. That decision led straight to the door ripping open, the scream, the cold click of steel on his wrists. After the arrest, Thorne shoved Xavier into the back of the patrol car. Brianna wailed, reaching for her father through the rain. An officer drove her to a neighbor's house nearby, arranged fast over the radio. Xavier sat handcuffed for 6 long hours at the station. No paperwork, no formal charge, just cold silence and a locked door. They finally let him go for a bail fee of $1,500. No crime was ever written down. Across the street from the station sat a small diner with a flickering sign. Xavier waited there for a tow truck to bring his Jeep. His wrists throbbed with dark purple lines. An older man slid into the booth across from him. His name was Caleb Jenkins, 68 years old, a retired school bus driver with tired, kind eyes. He set down a cup of black coffee, steam curling off the top. "Drink," Caleb said. "You look like you need it." He saw the raw marks on Xavier's wrists and sighed, long and heavy. "That man's been hunting this road for 12 years, Caleb said, his voice rough like gravel. "My son got caught in his trap once." Caleb explained it slow. Thorne had planted drugs in his son's truck cab. He forced the boy to sign a guilty plea to dodge 5 years in prison. His son lost his license forever. His business crumbled to nothing within a year. "If you walk away tonight," Caleb said, "he just keeps swallowing our sons." Those words landed like a spark in dry grass. Xavier felt his jaw tighten, the muscle flexing hard along his cheek. This was no longer only about him. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into his cold fingers. Outside the diner window, the tow truck's headlights swung into the lot, dragging his battered Jeep behind it. "Thank you," Xavier said quietly, "for telling me the truth." Caleb reached across the table and gave his shoulder a firm squeeze. "Somebody had to," he said. "Might as well be an old man, with nothing left to lose." He would not go home to Alabama yet. He rented a small wooden cabin at the edge of the county, $75 a night. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the porch light buzzed and flickered against the dark. Brianna stayed safe with a trusted colleague in the next town over. Xavier needed his hands free and his mind clear. He called Brianna every night at exactly 7:45. She told him about the goats next door and a cartoon dog with a broken tail. Her small voice steadied him more than any cup of coffee ever could. He always ended the call the same way. "Daddy's almost done, baby girl. Almost done." At exactly 9:30 Monday morning, he walked into the county records office. He filed as Pro Se, a citizen representing himself, no lawyer listed. He requested 3 things through a formal public records request. Dashcam footage from patrol car 308. Body cam footage from Thorne's uniform that night. Thorne's full complaint history for the last 5 years. The clerk behind the counter looked at him and smirked. She tossed his papers into a corner tray without even reading them. This would not be an easy fight for one man alone. Days later, a letter arrived. The county demanded $2,000 for $115.80 in processing fees. A clear attempt to scare him off. Xavier pulled out his card and paid every cent, calm and steady. He did not blink, did not argue, did not raise his voice. The clerk's smirk disappeared fast. She glanced at her supervisor's office, unsure what to do next. 3 days later, a thick envelope of files finally landed on Xavier's cabin table. The county had run out of ways to say no. He began finding Thorne's other victims. Janelle Monroe was 28, a single mother who lost her postal job after Thorne seized her car for no real reason. Terrence Clay was 34, falsely accused of resisting arrest, his name dragged through the mud. At first, both were too scared to talk. Fear had trained them well. Janelle's hands shook every time she said Thorne's name out loud. Terrence kept glancing at his front door, like the deputy might walk through it any second. But Xavier sat with them, listened close, and shared his own bruised wrists as proof. He spoke slow and soft, the same way he once calmed frightened witnesses in his own courtroom. Slowly, they agreed to sign sworn written statements. Janelle cried while she signed hers, her pen shaking against the paper. "Nobody ever believed me before," she whispered. Xavier just nodded and slid a box of tissues across the table. Word travels fast in a small county. A clerk at the records office was married to Thorne's cousin. Within 2 days, Thorne knew a stranger was asking questions about his stops on Route 45. He told himself it was nothing, just some outsider with too much time on his hands. He had run this road for 12 years, without a single scratch on his record that mattered. Nobody had ever pushed back this hard before, and that thought needled at him more than he wanted to admit. He poured himself a drink, that night, earlier than usual, and did not stop at just one. Thorne noticed the digging fast. At 11:42 one Wednesday night, his patrol car crawled past Xavier's cabin, headlights blazing through the bedroom window. It happened 3 nights straight, always past midnight. Then a letter came from Donald Fitzpatrick, the police union's sharp-suited lawyer. It threatened Xavier with 3 years in prison for slandering an officer if he did not drop everything now. Xavier read the letter once. Then he kept working. He drove into town the next morning and bought a small camera at the hardware store, $19.99. He clipped it to his rearview mirror with steady hands, testing the angle twice. A quiet voice in his head told him he would need it soon. He had learned long ago to trust that voice. That afternoon, he sat on the cabin porch and called Brianna again. She asked when they could go back to Grandma's house and finish their trip. Xavier's throat tightened for a moment before he answered. "Soon, baby girl," he said. "I promise you soon." Late at night, under one dim lamp, Xavier spread the FOIA files across the cabin table. It was 2:15 in the morning, and rain tapped soft on the tin roof. The lamp buzzed faintly, casting a thin yellow circle over the papers. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he kept drinking it anyway. He built a simple chart on his laptop, line by line. In the last 3 years, Thorne had pulled over 184 drivers on Route 45. 169 of them were Black or Latino. That was 91.8% of every single stop. Yet minorities made up only 18% of the whole county. The numbers sat heavy on the page, cold and undeniable. He rubbed his tired eyes and leaned back in the creaking chair. Outside, thunder rolled low across the hills, far off but coming closer. He thought of Janelle's shaking hands and Terrence's tight jaw. He thought of Caleb's son, stripped of his license, and his pride in one cruel afternoon. This was not just a chart of numbers anymore. Every single row was a family. Then Xavier found something bigger. Thorne always shut off his body cam 5 minutes before an arrest, wiping away any proof of violence. But that night, with Xavier, Thorne had been too sure of himself, too proud to think a quiet black man could ever fight back. He forgot to turn the camera off. Xavier sat back in his chair when he found it. For a long moment, he just stared at the screen, hardly breathing. Then a slow, quiet exhale left his chest. This was the crack in the wall he needed. Every slur, every threat, sat recorded in crisp digital sound. Xavier built a case file, 400 pages thick, every claim backed by law and fact. He labeled each page with careful, even handwriting, cross-referencing every statute by number. It read like a federal indictment already written. He printed 3 copies and locked them in a small fireproof box under the cabin bed. Some habits from the bench never left him. A judge trusts paper, not promises. Rain kept falling outside, steady against the tin roof. Xavier sat back and let out a long breath. For the first time in weeks, the weight in his chest felt just a little bit lighter. But Thorne was not finished yet. The night before the trial, Xavier drove Brianna home for a late dinner. It was 10:15 p.m., and the road had no streetlights at all. Red and blue lights flared behind them again, right on the darkest stretch of Route 45. This time, Thorne brought backup. Another deputy stood by the patrol car, arms crossed, watching. The younger officer's jaw was tight, his eyes darting between Thorne and the crying child in the back seat. Wind pushed through the pines, rattling branches somewhere off in the dark. A single porch light blinked on far down the road, then off again, too far to help. Thorne dragged Xavier out at gunpoint, the barrel raised and steady. He pulled a small plastic bag from his jacket. White powder sat inside it, catching the dim light. He shoved it close to Xavier's face. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold night air. His finger twitched against the trigger guard. Two choices. Thorne hissed, his breath sour and hot. Sign a drop charges form and leave this state tonight. Or this bag goes in your trunk, your girl goes to a shelter, and you're out in prison. Brianna sobbed behind the fog glass of the car window. Her small palm pressed flat against it, leaving a smudge in the mist. The other deputy shifted his weight, saying nothing, staring hard at his own boots. Xavier did not blink. His pulse stayed slow, and even like a man who had already seen the ending of this story. He glanced once at his rearview mirror. A tiny hidden camera sat clipped there, its lens catching every second in sharp, clear detail. "You just wrote your own sentence, Silas," Xavier said, quiet and flat. Thorne's hand trembled at those words. Something in Xavier's calm face cracked his nerve wide open. He yanked the bag back and stormed off into the dark, sure he had scared a broken man into silence. He was wrong. The patrol car's taillights shrank into the fog. Xavier stood still for a moment on the dark road, letting his heartbeat settle. Then he climbed back into the Jeep and reached over to squeeze Brianna's small hand. "We're okay," he told her softly. "Daddy's got you." She sniffled and nodded, still gripping his sleeve the whole ride back to the cabin. Back at the cabin, Xavier copied the footage onto 3 separate drives. He uploaded one straight to a secure federal server. At 1:30 in the morning, he emailed another copy to the FBI Civil Rights Division office in Jackson, Mississippi. This clip was no longer just evidence. It was a sword aimed straight at Thorne's entire crooked kingdom. Xavier sat on the edge of the cabin bed as the upload bar crawled forward. His hands finally shook just a little now that Brianna was safe and the danger had passed. He pressed his palms flat against his knees until the shaking stopped. Then he lay back and closed his eyes for the first real rest in days. The night before the trial, Thorne sat alone in his kitchen, a bottle of beer sweating on the table in front of him. His hands would not stay still. He kept replaying the moment on the dark road, the way Xavier's calm eyes never once flinched. He told himself it meant nothing, just a bluff from a scared man. But deep down, a cold knot had settled in his stomach and refused to leave. Across the county, Xavier sat at the cabin table one last time, reading through his 400 pages by lamplight. He practiced his opening words out loud, low and even, until they felt natural on his tongue. Around midnight, he finally closed the folder and allowed himself to sleep. Thursday morning came fast, gray and heavy with fog. At 8:30, Xavier walked into courtroom 3 at the Pinecrest County Courthouse. The room was already packed tight, with uniformed officers, every one of them there to back their brother in blue. The air felt thick like a hell breath before a storm. Thorne sat at the plaintiff's table, badge polished bright, uniform crisp and pressed. Beside him sat Donald Fitzpatrick in a $3,000 suit, smirking like the outcome was already settled. Judge Brenda Miller took her seat and banged the gavel once. She had close ties to the local police, and everyone in that room knew it. Her nephew worked dispatch at the same station as Thorne. Xavier sat alone at the defense table, no lawyer beside him, just a slim folder and a steady pair of hands. A few officers in the gallery snickered behind their coffee cups. One leaned over and whispered something, and they both smiled at Xavier like the outcome was already settled. Fitzpatrick rose fast, his voice smooth and sharp. He demanded the court dismiss every claim Xavier had filed. He pushed for 12 months in jail against Xavier for resisting arrest and obstructing justice. Judge Miller nodded along, already leaning one way. "Mr. Rollins," she said, tapping her pen, "you may present your defense." The room went still, waiting to watch one quiet man get crushed. Somewhere behind him, a chair leg scraped against the floor. Thorne cracked his knuckles under the table, loose and confident. Xavier rose slowly from his chair. He straightened his white collar with two steady fingers. His broad shoulders squared toward the room, and every whisper in the gallery died at once. A clerk near the door dimmed the lights, and a small screen flickered to life on the courtroom wall. Xavier requested 2 video clips be played for the court. The first was Thorne's body cam from the night of the arrest. Every ugly word, every slur filled the silent courtroom. Officers in the back row shifted in their seats, faces tight. Then came the second clip. Thorne, gun raised, threatening to plant drugs on an innocent man. Threatening a 7-year-old girl with a group home. His own voice, crisp and damning, echoed off the courtroom walls. Blood drained from Thorne's face. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. A vein pulsed once at his temple, then went still. His fingers curled into fists on the table, then slowly loosened like all the strength had drained out of them. Sweat rolled down the back of his neck, soaking into his collar. Officers in the back row of the gallery went rigid, hands frozen on their coffee cups. Nobody dared to whisper now. Silence. Fitzpatrick shot up from his chair, shouting that the defendant had no legal standing to submit evidence. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Xavier reached into his jacket. His fingers moved slow and sure, the way they always did on the bench before a final ruling. He pulled out a leather case, worn soft at the edges from years of use. Inside sat a gold-trimmed ID, the seal of the United States catching the courtroom light. He set it down on the evidence table without a word. Then he spoke, calm and steady as stone. I am United States District Judge Xavier Rollins, Southern District of Alabama. I am not here today to beg for mercy. I am here to enforce federal law. Nobody moved. Even the ceiling fan overhead seemed to slow, its blades ticking through the thick air. Somewhere in the back, an air vent clicked and hummed. A pen rolled off a table and hit the floor, the sound impossibly loud in that dead silent room. Judge Miller's hand shook as she reached for her gavel. She stood up fast, her chair scraping hard against the tile. This court recuses itself, she said, her voice thin and rushed. This matter now falls under federal jurisdiction. The room erupted into whispers. 2 officers near the back exchanged a look. Slowly, they stepped away from Thorne's side of the room, as if his badge had turned to poison. Outside the courthouse doors, 2 FBI agents were already waiting. The moment Thorne stepped through those doors, they moved in fast. Steel cuffs snapped around his wrists, the same wrists that once wore a badge like armor. He did not resist. He could not even speak. His badge caught the gray morning light one last time. An agent unclipped it from his chest and dropped it into a small plastic bag. Local families lined the courthouse steps in stunned quiet. They watched the man who had ruled Route 45 for 12 years get walked to a black government car and driven away. 3 weeks later, the Department of Justice formally took over the Pinecrest County Sheriff's Office. Federal monitors moved into a small office beside the front desk, reviewing every stop, every arrest, every report filed. Every deputy would now answer to federal oversight, whether they liked it or not. The county paid out $1,750,000 in total damages to the families Thorne had wronged over the years. Old dismissed cases were reopened one by one, and dozens of unfair records were wiped clean. In October, Silas Thorne received his sentence. 12 years in federal prison, no parole for violating the Civil Rights Act under Title 18, Section 242. Not one day of it would be forgiven. He stood at the sentencing in a plain gray jumpsuit, no badge, no polished boots, no smug grin. His lawyer, Donald Fitzpatrick, had quietly dropped his case 2 weeks earlier. When the judge read the sentence aloud, Thorne stared at the floor and said nothing at all. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered on the steps, cameras flashing in the gray morning light. None of them noticed the old bus driver standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, watching justice finally arrive. Janelle Monroe got her car back, along with a settlement of $120,000 from the county's insurance fund. She used part of it to open a small flower shop on Main Street, her hands finally steady again. She named it Second Bloom and hung a small photo of Xavier's case file behind the register, a quiet reminder of the day everything changed. Terrence Clay watched his false charges get erased from every record. He held his son close that night, no longer flinching at every siren in the distance. For the first time in years, he slept with his bedroom window open, letting the night's sounds back into his life. Caleb Jenkins, the old bus driver, who once poured Xavier a cup of coffee, stood outside the diner. He smiled wide when he heard the news on the radio. He raised his own cup of black coffee toward the sky, a quiet toast to a promise finally kept. His son called him that same evening, his voice light for the first time in years. His license was reinstated within the month, and he found work driving a delivery route 2 towns over. Back home in Alabama, Xavier Rollins returned to his quiet office on the top floor of the federal courthouse. Sunlight fell across his old oak desk, warm and gold in the late afternoon. He hung a new photo on the wall behind his chair. It showed him and Brianna laughing together on a porch swing, her small hand wrapped tight in his. He sat down, folded his hands, and looked at it for a long moment. The late sun caught the edge of the frame and made it glow. A soft breeze pushed through the cracked window, carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass from the courthouse lawn below. Brianna ran into the office a moment later, her school bag bouncing against her back. She climbed into his lap without asking, the way she always did, her sneakers still damp from the afternoon rain. "Daddy," she said, "did the bad man go away?" Xavier held her close and rested his chin on top of her head. "Yes, baby girl," he said softly. "He's gone, and he won't be hurting anybody else." His voice stayed calm, though his arms tightened around her just a little more. She nodded, satisfied, and pointed at the new photo on the wall. "That's a good one," she said. "Can we get another one soon?" Xavier smiled, the first easy smile he had felt in weeks. "Yeah," he said, "we can get another one soon." He kissed the top of her head and held her a little tighter, the porch light warm and steady behind them both. Outside his office window, the city moved on the way it always did, cars humming past, birds settling into the trees along the courthouse lawn. Somewhere down the hall, a clerk laughed at a joke, and the sound drifted in through the open door, warm and ordinary. No badge, no title, and no uniform stands above the law. Not out here, not anywhere. And sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one holding all the power the whole time.